right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Special Districts 2021 Program Annual Summit. We're going to be exploring the future of digital infrastructure. I'm Dustin Heisler. I'm Chief Innovation Officer for Government Technology Magazine. And on behalf of myself and Marlene Juba with AT&T, we'd like to welcome you to today's event. I'm excited to serve as your host. We've got a lot of ground to cover. Now, for those of you that are new, the Special Districts program is a joint initiative between Government Technology Magazine and AT&T designed to connect, inspire, and catalyze innovation with the over 38,000 special district leaders from around the country. We have an amazing event planned over the next 2 hours. But before we dive into all the content, here's a few brief housekeeping notes that are on the screen. We're going to send a recording of the presentation to all registrants within 48 hours. You can use this for your reference, or feel free to pass it along to your colleagues. We've also designed this webcast to be interactive, so you can participate in Q&A with us by asking questions at any time during the presentations using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please send in any questions that you have as they come up, and we'll address as many of them as we can as we go through the content. Also, during today's webcast, you'll be able to connect with your peers via LinkedIn and Twitter. For those of you who tweet, please use the hashtag Special Districts to share key takeaways, quotes, and learnings from today's webcast. Today, we're going to dive into what special district leaders need to know about the future of digital infrastructure. We know infrastructure is trending, and digital infrastructure modernization continues to grow in focus due to changing risk landscape, the shift to hybrid and remote operations and work, and also new available federal funding streams. Now is the time for districts to reevaluate their digital infrastructure foundation. And to help you do this, we've assembled an amazing program today to dive into what you need to know about the future of digital infrastructure, hearing directly from your peers that are navigating, funding, and innovating their way through it. So you can see by the screen, we've got a lot of program content today to go into. We're going to look at the future, kind of starting with a futurist perspective on what you need to prepare your infrastructure for around the corner. Then we're going to look at some of the security implications of all of this, look at some current events and what they mean for special district leaders. We're going to talk about tactics for innovation and funding. And then we're going to look at preparing your foundation for the future of digital infrastructure. All of these are interactive panels, and we've got an amazing set of panelists designed to help us unpack all of this. Now, before we dive into our first keynote fireside chat, I wanted to ask a poll question to the group so we can learn a little bit more about you and your greatest challenges. And as I do that, I'll spend a moment just letting you know who is on for our keynote today. Our speaker is someone with no shortage of new ideas and innovative programs, and it's my pleasure to introduce Brian Kelly, the Chief Technology Officer for the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission. He's also a board member for the Special Districts Program, to join us today as we're going to dive into the future, and we're going to talk a little bit about what he's doing today, where he's come from, and where he is planning his district to go through next. Brian, thanks so much for carving some time out to join us today.
Yeah, great to be with you this morning, Dustin, and have an opportunity to chat about the future.
Fantastic. So let's look at some of the top challenges before we dive into our discussion. It looks like we've kind of got a little bit of a tie here between keeping up with new regulations, some of the workforce challenges with recruitment and retention, understanding federal funding opportunities, and safely reopening offices. So a lot of interesting things for us to explore. Now, maybe to help set the stage, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission and your role there.
Sure. Well, the Ohio Turnpike is a toll road stretching across northern Ohio from the Pennsylvania border all across Ohio to the Indiana border, about 241 miles. We have about 56 million vehicles on our road annually. Over 900 employees working on the Ohio Turnpike. And one interesting fact is that we've been fully fibered along our road going all the way back to 1984. And so we're well prepared for what the future is going to bring. I'm the Chief Technology Officer. In my role, I'm focused on the technology vision for the Turnpike going into the future. Working on a number of exciting projects related to solar, connected vehicle technology, our new toll road modernization project, which is a project well over $200 million that will go live in 2023, and other innovation projects that we're engaged in.
So now that you've made it out of 2020, and we collectively in special districts have made it out of 2020, what are you currently focused on in your role?
Well, focused on the future. In the 21st century, we're now seeing the evolution of technology proceeding very rapidly. And so, right now, in the transportation industry, we're in the midst of a major transportation paradigm shift with automated vehicles, connected vehicles, electric vehicles, and tolling technology is changing as well. So focus on what the road of the future is going to look like and how we prepare ourselves to meet the future, which is right over the horizon.
So you've talked previously, and we've had a lot of discussions about this, about the similarities between 1899 and today. What are they, and what does it mean about the pace of change going forward?
Yeah, so I love to talk about the end of the 19th century. Horse and buggy was the major mode of transportation. It's what people knew, it's what they loved, it's what they were comfortable with. But technology was getting ready to flip, not just with automobiles, but we had the Wright brothers right here in Ohio working on this concept called flight. And so in 1899, Columbus, Ohio was the buggy manufacturing mecca of the United States. They were building new buggy plants, employing thousands of people, and they were focused on this technology that people wanted for transportation, the horse and buggy. But Henry Ford and others were up in Detroit. They weren't looking at the past, they weren't looking at the present, they were focused on the future. And shortly after the turn of the century, it all shifted. And all of a sudden, Henry Ford lit up Detroit and others there with the automobile and the assembly line. And the picture here is rather interesting. You see New York City Easter morning, 1900, over on your left. And in that diagram, the streets are full with horses and buggies, and there's one automobile there circled in red. Within 13 years, that had totally transformed, and the streets of New York City, as well as major other cities across the world were filled with the automobile. And so we're at a time now where we're just seeing technology evolve and advance and be adopted very rapidly by our society. We're seeing these major changes that are occurring very quickly.
Yeah, we've heard a common thread that years worth of work was compounded down into a matter of months, and as you said, I mean, this is kind of the new reality. So I'd love for you, as an innovator in a special district and one that's done this time and time again. Tell me a little bit about the three different approaches that you see to innovation in special districts.
Sure. Well, innovation in the time we live in, for some, it can be very scary, right? And some are almost paralyzed. You know, where do you begin, and what do you prepare for? And you can really be doing one of three things. One, you can be paralyzed and doing nothing at the lowest level. At the second level, you can be educating yourself and learning and trying to understand what these new technologies are. Where do they fit into your special district, if they fit in at all? And how might you adopt them? How might these technologies benefit your operations and your customers? And then at the highest level, there are those of us that are actually doing pilot projects and proof of concept projects. We're entering into shared collaborations with other governmental entities, with academic universities, private sector organizations, and we're actually starting to do and prepare for the adoption of these technologies to benefit our operations and our customers.
So now when you think about change management and getting people to think creatively is one thing, but getting people to kind of embrace the innovations that you're coming up with, the new ideas that you have, what's your secret to getting your teams on board with trying new things and adopting new things?
Well, you really need to focus on the innovators and the early adopters, right? Those in your organization that are down at the bottom, they're laggards. They resist change, resist technology. They're not going to be the ones that are really going to move things forward. But one of the things that we found out at the Ohio Turnpike that works really well is to just do small pilot projects. Keep it simple, and keep it focused, and see whether or not a new technology, adopting that technology within your work environment, whether what the benefits are, what are the risks, what does it take, and we've done a number of these projects over the past 3 years. Some have moved into full implementations. Others we've actually just shelved because we learned that whatever it was we were thinking about undertaking just wasn't really going to work out the way it did. So you have to be bold. You have to be willing to take some risks, but do it small, and do it quick. Leverage the agile type of implementation that we see in the Googles and the Amazons in terms of just getting into it, trying it out, and seeing how well it works.
With so much that can be done and so much I imagine that you have to balance just from a prioritization standpoint, how do you go about prioritizing and picking what to focus on that maybe some other special district leaders listening in should take note of?
Yeah, so if you have my slide 2 there, we can start there. But this is from the International Bridge Tunnel Toll Road Association, our emerging technology work group that I'm a part of. And what we did was we looked at technology prioritization by looking at all of the cutting edge technologies that are out there and giving them consideration in terms of how applicable they are to our industry. So, you want to think about your special district, what your special district does, and where some of these technologies place in terms of being applicable. And then we looked at maturity and created this little 5 scale chart here, where we start out with number 1, conceptual, maturing all the way to mature and operational. And so, those technologies that you want to learn about are probably in the first 3 there, and then the doing are definitely in the last 4 or 5. And those of us that are willing to be bold and torchbearers, we may start out there at maturity level 3 and start off with some pilot projects.
So as you look ahead kind of to next year, what's on your immediate radar as a focus area?
Sure. Well, we're very interested right now in solar energy, interested in electrification. Electric vehicles are going to be adopted in greater number in the next decade and beyond, as GM and other auto manufacturers now are retooling their plants and the assembly lines for electric vehicles, giving thought to how those vehicles are going to be charged. Is it going to be through charging stations at our service plazas, or could it possibly be while the vehicles are moving down the turnpike through in-road charging? And so we're looking at that as well. In 2022, all Ford vehicles coming off the assembly line will have the ability to communicate to other cars and to communicate to infrastructure. So we're looking at partnerships with auto manufacturers to understand this new technology, see how it applies to toll operations and to enhancing the safety of on our road, and then to prepare ourselves to be ready for these technologies as they become adopted.
Yeah, I think the partnership piece that you talked about is so crucial because districts can't do it all themselves and they can't invent everything themselves, but really leveraging and building on some of these partnerships is a great way to experiment. Now, kind of putting your futurist hat on, looking 3 to 5 years out, what's on your radar for kind of that landscape?
Sure. Well, I think we're all looking at artificial intelligence and starting to adopt applications that level artificial intelligence. We've been in the cloud now for quite some time, but now there's also edge computing, or it's also been coined fog computing, which is closer to the ground, real-time processing, the deployment of more sensors, more cameras, and improving customer experience in terms of how we support our customers 24 by 7. And then really looking to it blockchain. I think that's another one that really has some application, but it's figuring out where and how you leverage it. A lot of different technology, far beyond servers, software, and networking, where I started out 3 decades ago, right? Looking at these emerging technologies and trying to identify where they're at in terms of their level of maturity, when we're going to see major adoption, and then, again, planning to where you see being able to leverage that technology within your special district.
It's an exciting time to be in special districts. So foundationally, kind of looking at all the work that you're doing and the innovations that are taking place, what are some of the key technological and operational infrastructure elements that should be in place for special district leaders to help them navigate whatever comes next?
Well, I think it's building that a culture of innovation and change. Change is something that we as human beings, we cringe at. It scares us. In fact, all of us know in implementing major projects, change is probably one of the greatest risks that we have to manage. So, and it's really focusing on the future, right? Not focusing on the past and what we've done in the past, or necessarily what we're doing today in the present, but looking to the future. And we live in a different world too now. In the 21st century, we've seen consumerization really drive technology and technology adoption. And so, it's being in tune with our customers, understanding what they're expecting in terms of their relationship and the services that they desire, and then looking at technology and innovation to see how we can leverage that to give a better customer service, better customer experience, and to service our customers better, and to improve the overall operational efficiency of our operations.
Fantastic. So we have some audience questions for you that have come in, and just a reminder to the audience, you can use that Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen as we go through our panels today to ask questions as they come up. This one's around innovation and funding. So when you think about pilots and new technology and other things, what are you doing to help fund some of these new initiatives? Is it public-private partnerships? Is it what type of funding mechanisms are you using there?
Sure. The funding part of innovative technology is rather interesting, and there are public-private partnerships that can be leveraged. For example, in our solar projects that we're looking to undertake, the only thing that we'll really be providing is property, real estate. Everything else will be taken care of by someone else. And in some of our other projects, it's just shared collaborations, reaching out to universities, reaching out to private sector companies, and establishing shared collaborations with them. So we've done some projects where the investment on our part has just been internally people and time. And in other cases, it's been investments on infrastructure. But like I said, on pilot projects, proof of concept projects, you want to keep those rather small, both in terms of the scope of size and the cost, right? And prove on a small scale that the technology works, and understand how it gets adopted, and then move it to a larger scale.
That's great. So follow up to that is around how long do you normally run a pilot project, or does it vary by technology and kind of approach?
Again, we try to keep it very simple. So we do a phase one, and the phase one could be anywhere from 1 to 3 years. But with the evolution of technology today, when you get to that year 2 or year 3, the technology has matured so quickly that you're almost at the end of the cycle of that technology. So very, very short period.
What technology are you most excited about in the future of kind of transportation districts and agencies?
I'm most excited about autonomous vehicles. A large segment of our population, elderly and handicapped individuals, are greatly restricted in terms of mobility. Autonomous vehicles will give them a whole new life. And currently, we've got 37,000 to 40,000 people dying in traffic crashes every year. Traffic crashes are the leading cause of death, according to the CDC, for teenagers. And so autonomous vehicles, are going to radically change our lives in many different ways, but looking for the safety enhancements that they'll bring, and then the increased mobility for those that currently are very restricted from being able to get around because they can't drive themselves.
We'll definitely unlock a lot of new use cases. Last question for you, which kind of is a good segue into our next panel, is around cybersecurity. So thinking about the context of your district, yeah, how are you approaching cybersecurity today with, with these pilots that you're running, and, how do you balance the need for innovation along with the need to be secure?
Sure, and I think that's a key question, and I really like looking at what I call the spear of cybersecurity, and you split that spear in half. On one half, you have technology related to cybersecurity. On the other half, you have the people, the policies, the procedures related to cybersecurity. And so, it's cybersecurity 101, whether we're dealing with, servers, software, or networks, or we're dealing with the Internet of Things and autonomous vehicles. It's focusing on securing the enterprise with technology and securing it through security, education, training, awareness, and policies. And realizing that your employee workforce is a cyber warrior force in and of itself. Your employees are going to be the first ones on the front line of the cyber war to get that email with that link, or to go to a website and do something on a website. And so training them, very important.
Fantastic. Well, Brian, as always, it's so great to talk to you. It's always fun to kind of look around the corner and see where your mind is thinking and planning. So appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. I enjoyed having the opportunity to spend some time chatting with you.
All right. Well, now we're going to shift to discussing cybersecurity, and we have another poll question to kind of better understand how you are approaching cybersecurity and what your top cybersecurity challenges are. And as you're answering that, I will spend a moment introducing our next set of panelists that will be discussing exploring the new digital infrastructure security requirements and what you need to know. As I say your name, please unmute and join me on video. Joining me today as your moderator will be Steve Towns, Deputy Chief Content Officer for the Content Studio at Government Technology, and then Patrick Robinson, AT&T's Director of Cybersecurity. So thanks, guys, so much for carving some time out to join us and talk cyber today.
Thanks, Dustin.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin.
Steve, before I hand it over to you, let's look at how our audience voted on this one. So it looks like #1 challenge across the board is employee training, and that looks like it's followed closely by ransomware attacks. So some interesting data here for the group. And with that, I'll let you break down what we need to know about cybersecurity.
Well, thanks, Dustin. Hi, everybody. Like Dustin said, I'm Steve Towns. I'm Deputy Chief Content Officer for Government Technology. And with me is Patrick Robinson, Director of Cybersecurity for AT&T. Patrick, thanks so much for joining me for this session, which we're calling Exploring the New Digital Infrastructure Security Requirements. Based on recent events, maybe unfortunately, we have plenty to talk about, and I definitely appreciate you sharing some insights on this topic. Welcome.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity to share some ideas and some best practices.
So we thought, I know we want to kind of walk through some of the recent attacks, and we've seen some really high profile attacks over the last, half year or so, that I think have particular relevance for special districts. So let's take a look at some of those and maybe pull out some takeaways for our audience. I thought maybe in sort of rough chronological order, we could start with the SolarWinds attack that came to light late last year, where at a high level, hackers broke into a company that supplies IT management software that's widely used by public and private sector, and malicious code was distributed to the company's customer base through those regular software updates that they sent out. Patrick, talk about what is significant about this particular attack.
Well, Steve, that one's significant. The SolarWinds is really an example of a massive scale of attack. SolarWinds had perhaps as many as 300,000 customers. And from the attacker's perspective, SolarWinds wasn't really the target per se. It was those 300,000 customers that were the target. SolarWinds unknowingly distributed this backdoor into their systems, and that then created a backdoor into the customers. And it may go on record as the largest, most significant breach ever.
Wow, so really insidious. For our audience, I mean, what can special district leaders learn or take away from this? I mean, given this kind of attack, what do you do?
Well, first, the first thing is be wary of all third-party relationships. We need to establish processes to validate the security measures that every one of our third-party vendors uses. We need to engage our senior management and ask them to provide proof that their vendors use good security practices. We can no longer take it on the word of a vendor that it's good enough or we got you covered. We've got to have some documentary proof here. I think as we look out into the future, this point of distinction, this security best practices is going to become a competitive advantage, one vendor over the other. Steve, I think this will happen more quickly if our audience, though, begins to lean in like today, like right now, asking tough questions of their third-party vendors.
Yeah, interesting. So you really need to demand that out of your partners going forward. I mean, for your own protection.
Exactly.
So I know another event we wanted to touch on happened earlier this year, and it was an attack on a city water system in Florida, which I think really hits close to home for a lot of our special districts that operate this kind of infrastructure. Do you want to first describe what happened? And then we'll talk about, what we can learn from it.
Okay, that one goes into we're talking about the city of Oldsmar, Florida. Mm-hmm. I think it's a suburb of the Tampa Bay area. They're the topic here. I think we would characterize this as a case of better lucky than good. As the story has unfolded and as we've examined it, there was an employee on duty on a Sunday that was looking at an application on an overhead screen. The application was called TeamViewer, and it's widely used by our special districts. It's used to remotely access systems. As people work from home, they remote into the office and manage what they would normally do at a terminal. This employee is staring at a screen when he spots a mouse cursor inching across the screen, and he's the only one there. That tiny little visible cue was his first alert that something was about to happen. Because he was a diligent employee and he was paying careful attention, he was able to actually intervene and stop the hacker in their tracks. In the case, the hacker was already into the control systems and altering the configurations of the water system. So this diligent employee who spotted a single mouse cursor was able to save the day.
Yeah, really interesting. And as I understand it, I mean, that attack could have had just horrible consequences on the water quality for the city. I mean, really that one employee who was on the ball and paying attention and acted on it, I mean, saved what could have been a really bad incident.
Oh, Steve, it's amazing how much blind trust we imbue upon the organizations we interact with.
Yeah. So, I mean, Patrick, obviously, I mean, that was a case where, yeah, we got lucky, but we don't want to rely on luck. What can we take away from this incident? How do we we make it so we're not needing to be as lucky next time, and this gets detected.
Well, I like your point, Steve. I would like to see that at the top of a board meeting agenda. Luck is not our strategy. That really and truly, we cannot rely on an employee being at the right place at the right time, seeing the right odd movement and being able to affect it. Our adversaries are just too skilled for that to be a regular course. So what I would recommend is our senior leadership needs to begin asking hard questions about internal systems. And I'll replay what Brian Kelly was talking about a moment ago, because I like his analogy of the spear. Senior leadership helps us analyze the risk that we face. And that includes all of those things that Brian mentioned, the people, the processes, the technologies, all working towards one objective, and that is to understand the risk that we face and to develop proactive plans to mitigate that risk.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, Patrick. So I know we want to look at one more of these, and that's really the most recent incident. We're still seeing disruption from a ransomware attack a few weeks ago on the Colonial Pipeline, which, as we all know now, supplies fuel to much of the East Coast. I know that has been recent, but what do we know about that attack so far, Patrick?
Well, it's an evolving story. I shared with Dustin an article released on Monday of this week by the Associated Press, and it's an interview, a rather candid and somewhat uncomplimentary interview with the consultants that evaluated Colonial Pipeline 3 years ago, made some very explicit, clear recommendations on what needed to be done. And as if we look at it today, it would appear that Colonial Pipeline missed the opportunity to sufficiently fix the issues that were identified. For Colonial, for their board of directors, that type of press for a publicly traded company in this litigious environment doesn't bode well. So I think we'll share that article with the greater group later today.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, sounds like there are some takeaways that we can take out of that, even what we know so far. I mean, what can we learn out of what we know so far?
Well, I think, picking back up on what Brian mentioned earlier about this idea of the sphere, the people and processes and technologies, the very first driving activity that should take place is an assessment of the risk you face. If you don't know the risk you face, you can't manage what you don't understand. So you can't spend money, you can't deploy technology, and you can't engage people effectively unless there is some purpose-driven goal that says, these are the risks we know we face, these are the actions we know we take. And to the poll earlier about training, training will inevitably, Steve, become one of those things that our organizations need to make a top priority. The second recommendation is follow their recommendations.
Yeah. And for the audience, we've shared a link to the article Patrick just referenced. So it's an interesting read if you get a chance. It's available in the chat. Take a look. Patrick, one of the things I think all of these events point to is the urgency of preparing for these types of events. I mean, are we seeing more attacks? Are they becoming more serious? Talk a little bit about how the risk environment is evolving, particularly for special districts.
Well, Steve, we're speaking of a $6 trillion global industry. Cybercrime was recently identified as approximately a $6 trillion global industry. So to put that in comparison, America's healthcare industry is about an $8 trillion industry. So we're talking about a serious business, and our adversaries know how to run a business. I am amazed and impressed at how well organized and how purposeful and how innovative they are. Take, for example, DarkSide. This is the criminal enterprise that compromised Colonial. Since Colonial, they have published a manifesto on their dark web website that says they've improved their policies to evaluate targets brought to them by their business associates. Does this sound like a commercial company? You know,
Yeah.
they have business associates recommending targets. The business associate gets paid a commission for having identified a target that DarkSide can exploit. But DarkSide has had a moment of conscience. So they've decided that governments and schools and funeral homes are not viable targets for DarkSide anymore. How magnanimous of them. Now, in a $6 trillion industry, DarkSide is not the one player. So we cannot rely on their generosity for other people to bypass our special districts. Another thing about DarkSide, Steve, just to put their business model in perspective, is they're running an ad on the dark web right now. They're looking to hire and interview penetration testers.
Interesting.
These would be the people
Yeah.
that attack us.
So, I mean, yeah, really interesting and scary. I mean, it's organized, it's a serious business, it's big business. These attacks are going to continue, and sounds like, I mean, they're going to get more and more sophisticated as any business would evolve. I mean, it's such a challenging issue for all governments, including special districts. I mean, is there some general advice we can give to the leaders listening in today, maybe about, you know, what kind of questions should they be asking about their infrastructure, given the environment you just described?
Exactly. The advice is both deceptively simple and incredibly complicated. I've used a couple of words over and over again here, risk and proof. So for a board of directors or for an executive leadership team, just taking an organization or a third-party vendor at their word is insufficient in 2021. We need proof. We also need to understand what risk we face, and it's best to have some professional help you understand what risk you face so you can make competent business decisions, and then you can derive proof that you have done the things that you said you would do. The article that we've just dropped in the chat about Colonial, if I were in a special district, I'd print that article off and I would take it to my CIO or my CEO and say, with all due respect, could you envision us being named in this article? Do you think we should do something?
Yeah. Patrick, perhaps not surprisingly, I mean, we're starting to see a federal response to what's going on. President Biden signed an executive order, a couple weeks ago, aimed at strengthening cybersecurity protections. Do you want to talk about what you think the impact of that might be? I know that's brand new, but what do we think we're going to see?
It is, Steve. It is brand new with President Biden issuing these executive orders about improving cybersecurity posture on our critical infrastructures. But I must say, this is moving at a pace that when we poke fun at the federal government for being so slow, this is the opposite. On Monday, the Department of Homeland Security issued a press release that their subsidiary organization, the Transportation Security Agency, TSA, would be issuing some initial regulatory enhancements to the pipeline industry as early as this week.
So we can expect, and maybe back to, I think, in Dustin's original poll questions, I mean, one of those top challenges was compliance and, you know, keeping up with the changing regulatory environment. Sounds like this is a regulatory environment that is going to be changing pretty quickly.
It will. Department of Energy has issued an RFI, a request for information, asking the industry to make suggestions on what they, DOE, could do to help make the system more secure. We know that if it makes its way to Congress in the form of legislation, there are all manner of unintended consequences that come out of a highly negotiated House bill. So I think DOE, DHS, TSA will begin to hand down some of the near-term requirements, and then later Congress will weigh in.
So we're likely to see new requirements. Is there any optimism that we'll see increased federal support or funding for our state and local cybersecurity efforts? I know that's been a long-running sort of discussion or need on the state and local side.
Well, I'm kind of an odd character in the world of cybersecurity because I've been working in and around this one topic since 2003, and I still remain a level of optimism. In 2003, we did an assessment of America's critical infrastructures and wrote a report to DOE on the risks and the exposures and the recommendations for policy changes back then. In 2002, when we were doing our basic research, I interviewed the director of energy for a state government. And he told me with a perfectly straight face that every transformer station in his state used the same password to get into the substation. And his rationale was uptime of service is more important than security. And I respect a business decision like that. But now we've seen some middle ground begin to arrive. We realize that's not a smart way to do it. That was an element of what had happened with the Oldham, Florida breach was a common password had been shared around, became public, and the next thing we knew, we had a perpetrator in the system. So I'm optimistic. I think from 2003 to 2021, I've seen these infrastructures make technological improvements. I've seen many of them head in the right direction. So yes, I'm optimistic.
That's good news. Patrick, we've got a couple questions from the audience. Maybe we can give those maybe we can come up with some quick answers here around a few of these. First, though, a pretty big question, and it is how do you handle ransomware for all sectors, and also, well, also how will AI and neural networks improve or increase cybersecurity? So kind of a two-parter there. You want to handle the ransomware part first, and then maybe we could talk a little bit about, how AI and some of the more intelligent solutions coming along may help us out.
Okay. By the time we're talking about ransomware, we've effectively lost the game. The whole idea is not to talk about it in clear and present terms.
Okay.
But if you do, your incident response plan becomes your single most critical playbook that you build. Who do you talk to? Who do you engage? Who do you investigate? Who from management, from legal, from operations, from personnel? How do you build this quick response team? Because I observed ransomware traverse a flat network and infect 154,000 devices in less than 3 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you, and that's really an important part of the total equation is knowing how to respond to a situation, because we've really got to believe right now that we're already infected. We just haven't become the target.
Yeah. So Patrick, let's get to the second part of that question. I mean, I think there's a thought. I mean, this challenge kind of exceeds human scale ability to respond fast enough and watch kind of comprehensively enough.
Yes.
Are things like artificial intelligence going to help us out? And kind of what does that look like going into the future?
We have to use artificial intelligence on our side, Steve. And I'll give you an example of, in 2019, we had an incident in the state of Texas in which 23 governments were all compromised in less than 13 minutes. And as we decompiled that situation, we discovered that what had originally happened was an artificial intelligence scanning engine was scanning the globe for a particular kind and piece of software that had a particular software release that this artificial intelligence knew how to exploit. So it was a completely unattended attack. There weren't any humans directly involved in it. It was just a piece of software that looked for a problem, exploited the problem, and in the byproduct, infected 23 people in the time it's taking us to explain this story.
Yeah, amazing. So, I mean, the attacks are being supported by AI. The response is going to need that sort of help too.
And I think part of what we do as consumers of security technologies and services, and also to Brian's point about the people factor and the training, is we need to seek education on how does AI work on our side. You know, because we could have been scanning for that eventuality and patched it as easily as someone could have scanned for it and compromised it.
Yeah. Patrick, here's another audience question. I think it's a good one, a good practical one. And it is, are there some federal resources out there that are available to special districts that, you know, that this audience ought to know about and could maybe give them some practical help around some of these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. Department of Homeland Security maintains a great resource of best practices and information and practical tools within some very, very limited capabilities. They can actually help special districts scan for vulnerabilities. You know, all of this is available on DHS and on their sister organization, CISA, the Center for Internet Infrastructure Security. So CISA can help as well. So there are DHS and CISA resources that I would highly recommend to our organizations to tap into those. And Dustin had mentioned early in our conversation about funding. I think we all keep a very close eye on the funding sources that are available, because we may be able to find ways to fund initiatives through federal grants and other programs.
Thanks, Patrick. Let's get to one last question here, and then we'll wrap it up. But here's one from another audience member. My district has a disaster recovery plan and a business continuity plan, but should we update it based on new cyber security threats that we're finding out about today?
Yes, for many of us, we're working remotely. You know, even as COVID begins to abate, many of us are still working remotely. So the first question to ask of your disaster recovery plan is, how does it work if I'm home and I cannot physically get to my office? What am I missing? What do I have to accommodate? What changes do I need to make? So I'm glad they asked that question, because the audience needs to hear that. Everyone should have some manner of disaster recovery business continuity plan, but has it been tested against the newly remote workforce?
Yeah, interesting. The environment's changed so much over the last year, and your plans really need to evolve with it.
Yep. We had a situation, a customer I can't mention, but they had a situation where inadvertently a computer network device began to spew data all over the network and effectively shut it down. And what it required was for someone to go to the office to find the computer that had the network designs on it, and the building is locked and unattended.
So you're gonna run into all kinds of little details like that
Yes.
if you don't rethink this through.
Yes, exactly, Steve. Yes.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Patrick, thanks a bunch for spending some time with us. I mean, it's such a big issue. Really appreciate you kind of working through some of these details with us. Maybe, I mean, any final thoughts you want to leave this audience with, or maybe one message you'd like to get through to the group before we wrap?
Well, that article I shared, you know, like I said, if I were a change agent in my organization, or if I were a champion of cybersecurity, or if I just wanted to get people's attention, I'd print that article and hand it to a few select people and ask the question, what if this were us?
Yeah.
Yeah. People, no one wants to be named in an article like that.
Right.
Yeah. So be proactive, engage the executives, engage the board of directors, know your risk, know how to manage your risk.
Well, with that, Patrick, let's wrap it up. Thanks again. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely, Steve. Thanks very much. It's a pleasure talking again.
Absolutely. Dustin, we'll hand it back over to you.
All right. Great job to you both. Insightful as always. Now we're going to shift gears and we're going to talk about discussing innovation and funding tactics of digital infrastructure. And we have another poll question that you'll have an opportunity to answer around whether or not you have been able to successfully receive and use federal funding for your district from 2020 to 2021. While you're answering that, I'm going to introduce our next set of panelists for preparing for the innovation and funding digital infrastructure landscape. As I say your name, please unmute and join me on video. Joining me today are Jonathan Cruz, Director of Financial Planning and Innovation for the Moulton-Niguel Water District, Carlita Mendez, CMS Director for the Burlington Housing Authority, and Devin Winthrop, AT&T Principal Architect for State and Local Government. Thanks so much for carving some time out to the full group for joining us. Let's look at how our audience responded to this funding poll before we dive into our discussion. It looks like about 22% of you have been able to get federal funds, and about 53% of you have not used or received federal funds, and 25% of you are unsure. So definitely a complex landscape as you look at all of the interesting guidance and transfer clauses that exist. So appreciate everyone answering that question. All right, so as we talk about innovation and funding, I thought maybe to start and to kind of kick things off, we'd go to Devin to talk just at a national level, how you're seeing special districts respond to the funding and operational constraints that they have. Can you share a little bit about the landscape that you're seeing here, Devin? Oh, I think you're on mute, Devin.
The good old double mute.
Double mute.
Yeah. It's certainly diverse across the board, with the one commonality really being, low funding. And the low funding, basically when you take a population, you lock them down, they're going to lock down their house for a long period of time, you're going to see a large revenue drop. Some's affected more, transportation. We still have some corridors that still aren't up and running at this time because there's not enough rideshare or ridership that's on the corridor to take it. We're seeing, rideshare and buses starting to pick up a lot more and things of that nature, but the transit were definitely affected greatly by that. Even talking to some water districts and smaller power companies that are funded by the city or county, they're like, we're funded by tickets. Nobody's driving, so we have no funds coming in. Our budgets are being slashed by the cities, by the states, or by whatever umbrella that is helping to fund them. So we're seeing across the board a huge amount of lack of funding. But what we're also seeing on the flip side is a lot of cost cutting because of, as I call it, the great COVID cloud migration. We're seeing a lot of people that have had these older legacy systems that were very high cost to actually maintain, but it was easier to keep them in place and to do any changes. And we're seeing them, go towards a cloud because everybody all of a sudden overnight had to work virtual. They're saying, hey, the cost of doing this is a lot less and it's a lot lower, lower cost overall to maintain. And we'll talk a little bit later on about what that would mean moving in the future and what we have to take into account for that. But, they're saying, hey, this is a great way to do business. You know how it is when you adopt something, even temporary, no such thing as temporary, it becomes permanent. And then the other thing that we've seen is, following up on the last segment, the cyber attacks are really up, especially in the special districts sector. They found out, the cost to stay up to date is a high cost. And in the past, when I was talking to a CISO, one good thing about this whole, the whole COVID is I used to have to really fight to get a budget, for security. They never understood why I needed that. But it's a lot easier now to get it because they've realized, especially with everything that's gotten in the news, the cost is much higher to try to mitigate it, as we've seen, right? It could be, 100-fold of what it would cost just to keep your, cybersecurity up to date. So those are the three that, thinking about it, that I've seen is just overall lack of funding across the board in how the ripple effect has trickled down, whether it's direct, like with the transits, or, if you're a district that's being funded by the city or county, lack of funds coming in and the lack of tax revenue because people aren't working. And then, the cost cutting, on the bright side, the cloud adoption. And then, but then also, things like, when you're down, they're going to come after you. So the cybersecurity attacks are on the rise. And what can we do to, there's a higher cost there to associate it. The good news is moving in the future, as you adapt more of a cloud first technology, you're going to have cyber, built into that, your security built into that. And you're going to find a more efficient way of getting business done, a lot like the private sector has done for years. And it's going to be easier to proceed.
Yeah, absolutely. A perfect storm of constraint also lends itself to innovation and creative ways of getting around it. And so, Jonathan, I want to go to you for this one. And, Devin talked about the national landscape, but let's talk a little bit about, the hyper-local landscape of what's happening in your district and what constraints have maybe carried over from the craziness of 2020 and how you're working to address them right now.
Well, for one thing, the remote work aspect, you can hear the gardener outside most likely. So I apologize for that, and hopefully he'll be done soon. I would say for us, I mean, one of the big things we're seeing in this kind of hyper local space is we look just to our own customer base. Finance-wise, our district actually wasn't really too impacted by COVID. We have a lot of supplemental revenue streams from things like cell lease arrangements where cell carriers actually place their antennas at the sites of our reservoirs. Turns out, because we like reservoirs at the top of mountains to keep the systems up there, that's also a really good place for telecom. So we really weren't too impacted by that, but what we did see was that there are customers, individual families, households that are very impacted by this. And the volume of those, again, not enough for it to be a real big financial burden for the district, but operationally, what happens when all of a sudden now customers are no longer going to be having that shutoffs moratorium? How are we going to actively engage these customers essentially all at once? Whereas last year it would have been spread out just kind of as the billing cycles go through. But it's almost like flip a switch and you have to be all of a sudden set up to take in this volume of customers, because we want to make sure too that these are positive outcomes. We don't want to shut anybody off. And just logistically, how do you deal with that? How do you take in all the information in a timely way? That's one of the things that I think is going to be for us a huge component of our response.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got your hands full with that. So Carlita, I want to get your take kind of on this. You mentioned previously that the pandemic put housing agencies on two different spectrums, one good and one bad. Can you share a little bit about the impact that it's had on your district and what you've had to do in response? Oh, I think you're muted, Carlita. Maybe a double mute. We'll come back to you. I'll have our team work with you to get your audio going. So, all right, so let's talk a little bit about the funding dynamics. So Jonathan, we'll stick with you for this. So, funding being a key theme in all of this, what are some of the new funding sources or models, whether it's, federal funds, cost recovery, public-private partnerships, what are you looking at tapping into with your district? And what have you been able to successfully navigate? And any advice you have there for other district leaders would be great.
Sure. So I would say, as it relates to like what have we utilized, I think as there was in some of the prior discussions, for us, public-private partnerships do a lot as it relates to being able to find organizations that are willing to just help out and do work with other entities to try and solve these kinds of public good problems. And really having staff that are able to go and communicate that story is something that really makes it an opportunity to build partnerships. And with public-private partnership, of course, you need people to be able to work together. But where we've seen a ton of value with that is the ability to potentially, revolutionize and optimize our operations. We have one partnership that's out there that we're working with UC Davis to develop an energy optimization model that allows us to go and see which areas we should pump from to go and keep our energy costs lower. And so, though those aren't direct funding sources, I like to think very much of cost savings as revenue. When you can go and find these kinds of cost savings just through efficiencies and new technologies and things of that nature, that's really where there's a lot of opportunity. Because as we've seen, as some of these spending bills have come out, very careful changes in language can all of a sudden mean that special districts don't potentially receive certain kinds of funding. So that's something we're definitely keeping an eye on and are really excited and hopeful for some potential language changes coming up. But it's definitely something where you need to be spending the time and energy to track these things, and also creating partnerships and relationships at the other local agencies where they might be the ones that are responsible for distributing the funding, as it turns out. Well, in our case, that is what's going on with our county. And it was a good thing that we had started having proactive conversations with my counterpart there, so that when we were able to receive some funds, and admittedly not a whole lot just yet, but that pipeline that was there from them getting their information all the way over to us, so that we could make sure that when it was ready, we were actually able to receive the funds. So I think being set up with those partnerships is a big part of it too.
Yeah, I think the partnership piece is really key. And I know we had a question in the chat around, can you use CARES Act funding or the American Rescue Plan Act funding to pay for upgrades to municipal IT? And for the CARES Act, it's very explicit. It's got to be COVID specific response. So the answer for that would be no. For ARP, it kind of depends, that's kind of an asterisk there. There is a lot more variance in how you can use those funds, but to the point that Jonathan was making, the partnership side is going to be key there, because many special districts weren't direct recipients of that, but are able to have funds transferred from a state or a county or a city. And so understanding the nuances of kind of the US Treasury guidance there is going to be really important. We'll share links to all of that for the group as well, so that way you've got that. Looking at that federal funding landscape, Devin, I'd love to get your take on this as well. As the new funds are emerging here, what are some of the things that these district leaders should be doing to take advantage of new things like the American Rescue Plan Act and, solving some of the critical issues that are there, like even digital divide?
Yeah, that's kind of the magic bullet here. It's good, I talked to some people that are applying for the grants, like, oh yeah, just put in digital divide and you'll get funding almost. But I want to kind of build off what Jonathan was saying, was shared partnerships. So we're seeing a lot of that going on. Like his partnership with UC Davis, we've seen that in the past. Obviously, working with the educational and what they can bring as far as new technology. But we're also seeing is when I talk about shared partnerships, there's some private partnerships that you saw happening right in the beginning of COVID. A lot of donations and things of that nature, getting devices out. But more along the lines of interdepartmental or intergovernmental, where we have cities, we'll sit down and have a discussion of with a city planner or city CIO, well, what's your plan, what's your vision? And the vision is to have digital divide, have access for everybody everywhere. But there's kind of like, well, what would that look like? If the students at the house, they have their own log on, that would get on to the school system. If they're getting on a city bus, would it be a different log on, or would it be the same log on? Is it continuous? Or is it completely autonomous? And they go to a school park or a local park? What does that look like as well? So you're talking about you're talking about a school, a transit, and a parks authority, all working hand in hand with the city. So partnership is really, really key in that. And another one of the technologies we're seeing where this is really playing out in real time is the reemergence of private cellular networks. A lot of the energy companies, a lot of special districts remember that from back when, but the cost was just so high because you had to purchase your own spectrum, and just cost of the spectrum was extremely high. Those costs have come down with the advent of CBRS. Obviously, some limitations there, such as don't do it next to the Coast Guard, but it is being utilized very quickly and very fast. We're seeing some school districts, go after it right away. But what's really interesting is when we're seeing cities and counties wanting to deploy it, because there's areas where there's just a lack of digital advantage. And we're seeing then if a city's providing it, I'm actually at a city right now. We're going to sit in on a conference for a city where they're providing a solution for the city employees. They're also providing it for students in these areas, and they're just going to VPN back through their network into the school. And then we're seeing them provide it for the homeless. And then the next step is it's like, well, wait, we have all these utilities underneath us. Why can't we provide, connectivity for the utilities or the special districts for that as well? And then it even moves out to more, we got an extremely rural area where we're feeding this. We have bus and transportation going through here as well. We can provide connectivity for them, all on a private cellular network. Ability to roam back and forth, but it really helps with that, again, back with that connectivity and that partnership. So it comes down to, when I'm talking, I'm across the virtual table of people, I try to ask, hey, who are you partnering with? If I'm talking to an MTA, are you partnering with a city? Or talking to about what you're trying to do? Like, are you where the city wants to do the same thing? So a lot of it is that sort of partnership. And also for Digital Divide, depending on what special district are you? Do you have any public gathering spaces under your purview? Obviously a park. That's a big one. We're seeing a lot of parks trying to light up the parks with Wi-Fi. So when you're in the park, you have connectivity. Do you have a transit station, whether it's a bus, a train, whatever? People are staying there for a long period of time. They're gathering. Do you have Wi-Fi on there as well as on the vehicle itself that they're going through there? And then last but not least, if you look in the American Recovery Plan, ARP, they've allocated $650 million just for cybersecurity. Because they know. So back to the thing about IT, yeah, most definitely it's there because they realize COVID has really exposed the lack of digital infrastructure, not just for the impoverished, but also for our own networks and our own governments and our own special districts. So these fundings are coming directly out. So this is the time, like we've said, I think we've said a couple of times, kind of the perfect storm to revamp your digital infrastructure.
Absolutely. So Carlita, I want to bring you in now too, because, as I mentioned a moment ago, you've seen this impact, districts one of two ways, good and bad. And I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit about, what your district has done in response and kind of where you're at today.
Yes, thank you. Can everyone hear me well now?
Sound great, loud and clear.
Great, excellent. So I am from Bremerton Housing Authority, and what I've observed are housing authorities that have either strived with embracing innovation, with embracing creativity during the pandemic so that we can continue to provide housing services and financial support to low-income families in all of our communities across the country. Other housing authorities that were not as nimble, perhaps smaller housing authorities who did not have as much support, capacity, or bandwidth to begin with, struggle and have difficulties providing their services to local communities. That's definitely what I've observed. I'm thankful that within our own agency, we're able to, be completely open-minded and work through challenges, both operational challenges and external challenges with supporting the families that we house, because they were dealing with challenges themselves, educating their children at home. On top of that, with loss of jobs across the country and how that has impacted and led to the nationwide eviction moratorium. This pandemic has really hit housing authorities very hard, very strong. And I've seen it be handled by housing authorities in both ways throughout the country.
That's great. And I'd like to stick with you for this one too, because Jonathan talked a little bit about the funding sources and like the role of partnerships in navigating some of these constraints. So what are you tapping into here? Is it federal dollars? Is it cost recovery models, public-private partnerships? What's been a successful way for you to kind of navigate these fiscal constraints?
Right. So I would say we've attempted all of the above. As a housing authority, we have tapped into funding relief funds that came through the government and the feds at the federal level, some at the state level, and we're located in Washington State for our housing authority. We utilized funds to completely remodel and revamp our reception area so that we could so that we'll be prepared to open up our lobby area so we can continue in-person servicing while keeping our staff safe and keeping our residents and the clientele we serve safe as well. So thanks to the funds, we're able to do our first floor remodel, and that actually happened well and quickly, and we were thankful for that. And as you can imagine, that decision and action also helps and will also help a benefit in the long run. That's a remodel that our agency did not have to pull out of our own funds or reserves. So we've utilized funds that came through the federal and state level. We've also been a part of outsourcing and handing out funds within our community. So part of our agency consists of contract management services, and we perform administration services for the feds, for HUD. And what they've come and asked us to do is to release COVID supplemental payments to owners and management agents within the state of Washington State, Utah, and Nebraska. And so this type of funding flow occurred to multifamily or affordable housing properties all throughout the country. We just happened to be one organization that disseminated these funds through our 3 states. So we witnessed that with regards to the flow of fund. And lastly, regarding private-public partnerships, because we are in the business of making money so that we can house people locally, my business development team have been active and watching movement on the ground to see how we can act as service providers to bring in new business and help other housing agencies disseminate housing funds that have flowed through their agency through the state or federal level, while we bring in a fee for helping them disseminate those funds.
That's fantastic and incredibly creative. So I appreciate you sharing that. So now, I mentioned innovation as a part of this, and we know innovation is a key element of navigating constraint. So Jonathan, I'd love to hear from you first on what are some examples of how you've embraced innovation to navigate some of the operational and fiscal constraints we've talked about. And then most importantly, for those listening in, how can they replicate what you did?
Sure. So I think as it relates to just innovation, it's something that's always been very core to Moulton as part of our culture and really just kind of expectation of our staff. But really that has a lot to do with being willing to change things that have been done one way for a very long time. And so that's already something that was a bit embedded into our culture just to begin with. I would say it's safe to assume it had never been tested quite so much as it was just this last year. But you can imagine all of these, 30, 40-year-old processes where billing staff go and create a work order that's a piece of paper that they hand to the field technician. Well, now you can't hand a piece of paper to somebody. So what do you do, considering we had to flip the switch and go a different route? So we actually we better leveraged, I would say, our Office 365 platform and came up with a workflow that we could tie a PDF that was generated from our enterprise system, get that into a workflow that could then go be routed to the correct department, correct field technician based on where they were. And then from there, the information could come back to the billing staff person without needing to wait the whole day for the field tech to come back and give them that piece of paper. I think one thing that's key about those kinds of changes in ways of doing things is also the understanding that no one is going to get it right on the first try. Anyone that says that they are is either lying or not understanding what they're getting themselves into. But having that kind of understanding that things can be changed afterwards, do please give me that feedback. You're a stakeholder in this process. I think that's one of the things that's really key to being able to replicate any kind of innovation is just including everybody and understanding and making it very clear from the get-go that you're going to do your best to get it right, but some things are going to come up and it's imperative that you tell me what's wrong so we can fix it.
Yeah, those are great words of advice. So Carlita, same question kind of for you, thinking about how you've embraced innovation, embedded that into your culture, but how the audience can replicate what's been successful.
Well, that's a really interesting, I have an interesting response. And I definitely have to echo what Jonathan just stated. What is embedded in your culture? Does your work culture and workforce embrace innovation, creativity, and change? Are you a learning organization? If you are, being nimble, being open to getting it wrong the first time and working to improve on it, that's the key. That's the key key. And that has to be worked on pre-pandemic, pre-emergency, pre-crisis. And so what I've observed, because we are a mid-sized housing authority and we have multiple departments, and as you can imagine, we have several subcultures within our agency. And so in other areas of our agency where their subculture wasn't that close to that of a learning organization or that embraced creativity, we observe we've been doing this for decades, why do I have to change? I just want to take this home and do it at home. Well, that's not possible. We are working with sensitive and confidential tenant information. We have social security information. We have access to medical records. And while just setting up at home sounds simple, it really is not. So we have, as an agency, experienced both sides of the scenarios with regards to embracing change. But I do believe that if others would like to replicate what we have done, I would definitely say work now on a workplace culture that will be willing to face anything that comes your way. This pandemic happened to be one big thing that came our way, but this will actually have you and your workforce remain nimble for anything else that comes about.
Yeah, that adaptability is really key. Now, Devin, from a technology standpoint, we know tech plays a key role in innovation too. So how is new infrastructure like cloud helping other special districts meet their new expectations, better navigate fiscal constraints, and ultimately unlock innovation?
Yeah, it's been very interesting because I kind of go back, I sat down and before the great COVID cloud migration, I was chatting with a CIO of an MTA in California, and we were looking at some edge technologies, and we were very innovative MTA. And I asked, well, what happens if the building becomes a pumpkin tomorrow? How are people, get in remotely? And no, only 5 people will ever work remote from this building. That was February 2020, early February 2020. In early May, or March, it was, how do I get, 5,000 people to work remotely? So we've seen this fast adoption of cloud, where in the past, public sector has been very heel driven to go into the cloud world. It's very much, we want to have our piece of hardware, we want to touch it, we want to feel it, we want to pay it one cost for it. So not only was it before COVID, it was an issue of the technology team, the CTO, CIO might want to move forward with cloud, but purchasing wasn't comfortable with it. So they wouldn't allow it. So I've seen that happen over and over again. So what I've seen with this is all of a sudden, okay, let's move forward with this. And it's been eye-opening for everybody to see what can be done. We're seeing a lower number of the people in the office. So they're saying, hey, we don't have to maybe have all these offices. We don't have to have all this space. We can release all these capital costs and revamp it because people can now work remote. Because what we're finding is 70% of public sector is saying we're going to have we're going to have a hybrid workforce where X amount of people will be virtual. Obviously, some people are going to want to come in. We had a whole nother talk about that, right? Dustin, about that before in the past, because some people just like to come in the office, and I'm one of them. But we're seeing a lot more work virtual in the world, and that has to be done through that cloud environment. It also helps because now you can have a broader workforce to hire from. I have friends in the industry that work in special districts. They're like, no, I do not have to live here now. I can go move to XYZ, and as long as I have a connection, I'm good. I have to come in for a meeting once a month. We're seeing this a lot in Northern California, where you have like the San Francisco Bay Area, very expensive to live. A lot of people are finding, hey, I can live in a more urban area more non-urban area where the costs are much lower to live. I've got a great broadband connection. I can do all the work I need to do. So it's become a lot more appealing. You can hire people that don't have to live necessarily in your district. It's nice to have that because there's, a bond there, but it's not needed. Or if you have somebody that wants to move to another state or somewhere else, you're not losing them as an employee and have to, absorb that cost of hiring somebody else new and training and losing all that value. You can keep them working, within it, because now you have the tools that are around it The biggest challenge, though, is access for everyone, everywhere. So that's one of the biggest challenges. And Carlita, hit a good point that, hey, we have records that cannot be shared. We have public information. I work for AT&T. We're the same way, but we're virtual. Private sector has accomplished that in many ways, and there's a lot of tools around cloud and cybersecurity and privacy that are out there that can be implemented. So we're seeing a lot of new, quick, fast adoption. Some have not been the best because it opens up some security issues. So we always want to take a look at our security solutions whenever we're moving into the cloud. But what we're seeing is an eye-opening and a realization of, wow, I can actually have a virtual environment and it can be secure. And this as-a-service stuff is pretty cool. One of the biggest cost-cutting I've seen is people going from that server, right, that's sitting in a data center or maybe in their other location that they paid for. It's all paid for, but they got to get a new one. They do data backups. They got a physical circuit going to that location. They've got their entire, network. They have two of everything. So why don't we just instead use this as a service, see what we can spin up in the cloud, whether it be, AWS, Azure, Google, or, XYZ. I don't have to pay for a dedicated server. I'm paying for a virtual access. I don't even have to pay, depending on how you're going to access that. You can have a service where you don't pay for a circuit, you're paying for usage as you access it. And so, your data backup, to have to pay for a fixed cost, which is a high cost, 24/7, 7 days a week, that gets extremely high. When you start looking at it as a service, you become much more comfortable with cloud. Once you're more comfortable with it as a service, you're seeing that you're now spending pennies on the dollars for that than what you used to. And then you start looking at, well, I don't need all this space. I think I'll share a little bit later a use case on this. I can release all this cost I'm putting on retail or on space and on buildings, and I can invest it back into my people and my technology.
Yeah, I completely agree. So now as we look at the future, kind of in our final section of this conversation, Carlita, we'll start with you on this. Looking at the remaining months of 2021 and, the beginning of 2022, what new innovations or funding are you incorporating or looking at incorporating into your funding?
Most recently, within the last few weeks, with the Rescue Acts and funding coming down into the states, we are keeping an eye out on emergency voucher funding. And so some of you may be familiar with the Section 8 program or the voucher program. And so with the country's situation under our eviction moratorium, I foresee that once it's lifted, we will see a tidal wave of and a change in the population or profile of the families that we serve. I believe that we will see more middle income families that housing authorities and housing agencies will be serving. And so we are paying a close attention to emergency funds that are being dispersed throughout the states and into local communities. We received our community's emergency vouchers, and I've been disappointed to see that voucher fundings that were handed to housing authorities are lower than I expected. Definitely not at the level that our country needs to circumvent or mitigate that tsunami of evictions that's going to come our way soon. And so we are paying close attention to that. And so, of course, there's another side of that coin. Earlier, I mentioned that we are service providers, and that's a way that we bring in revenue. So if there are housing authorities that are unable to administer their funding or their emergency vouchers, I am turning to them to ask if they'd like to partner with us so that we can help them disseminate their funds into their communities so they can help families locally there while we bring in a small fee for helping them do so.
This is a smart model. Well, final word for you, Jonathan. I'd love to hear kind of what you're planning the rest of this year into next year.
Well, I'll definitely echo a lot of what Carlita just mentioned, really looking for any of that kind of emergency funding that comes out. California was projecting, a huge budget deficit. It ended up being quite the opposite. But, in all of these great plans that I think really have the right things at heart. The implementation and logistics of all of that is where, good ideas can die and people don't get the need that they actually really do need. So for us, it's really going to be, again, like I mentioned, making sure that these customers who might be subject to shut off or looking at a really large bill, that we've done really everything that we can for a successful outcome. Shutting somebody off is essentially us saying that we're losing that funding too. So it's not good for anybody for that to happen. And so how can we supplement those households that have the need with this new funding? And then also too, how might that just alleviate the overall indebtedness that we're trying to help these customers grapple with? Is we're effectively, their customer service support person who's walking them through this process that, we are really interested in, but might not have a whole lot to do with logistically, other than maintaining those partnerships so that we know what local nonprofit to outreach to, who's responsible for the case management and things of that nature. So that's definitely something I'm looking forward to as it relates to continuing to innovate for things you haven't done before. Is really just maintaining that level of service that we expected prior to the pandemic, to make sure that we maintain it after we come out of it as well.
Yeah, well said. And Devin, final word for you.
Yeah, so now's the time to revamp and modernize your digital infrastructure. Simply what Brian said before, this is the perfect storm of technology. When he threw up the slide of the horse and buggies and the cars, it couldn't be any more true in this time. With the adoption of cloud, with carriers launching 5G, with you finding fiber access in more areas than you've ever seen in the past, and you combine that with edge computing and edge technologies that are out there, along with software defining networks, it becomes the perfect storm, adding in with the funding that's available from the federal standard to just be able to bring this into your world and revamp your network. A great examples of a small water district that was supported by the city. Back when I was saying they don't need the real estate anymore, they discovered they were going to close down a building because people were working remote. Well, hey, that was where their server farm was. So they decided, you know what, let's just go 100% virtual. We're using a lot of this cloud stuff anyway. So they moved everything up into the cloud. And then we're using LTE connectivity as well as fiber connectivity at each site. We're also using LTE. We moved all of their meters and everything to an LTE connectivity that's private. All connects directly to Azure, and their costs went down extraordinary to do this. They're still in the middle of migrating, and it's going to take a year or so to get this done, especially when we're talking about thousands of water meters and things of that nature. But just the cost cutting alone, by just kind of the thought process of we don't have to have a server farm in a building and we don't have to pay for all of that. So again, kind of the perfect storm. It was kind of the silver lining of this whole disaster of pandemic for this smaller water district, because they saw a much smaller cost savings, were able to keep all their employees, didn't have to lose anybody, and being able to have a happier workforce overall.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Jonathan, Devin, and Carlita, for joining us. We're going to shift gears and talk about the future of digital infrastructure now. And while we're bringing in our next group, I'm going to ask another poll question about what topics you would like us to cover in future special district program events. As you're answering that, I will introduce our panelists for preparing for the future of digital infrastructure. We've got Brendan Daly, the Director of Strategy and Sustainability for the Chicago Park District, Daniel Meyer, AT&T Principal Consultant for State and Local Government, and Gloria Salazar, CEO of the San Joaquin Regional Transit District. Thanks so much for carving some time out to this panel to join us for our last panel discussion of this event. And let's look at what our audience is really interested in learning more about. It looks like emerging technologies are right there at the top, and really kind of an even split between everything else. So thanks for all of that feedback for each of you that shared. So Gloria, we'll start with you on this. Let's start first with the state of your digital infrastructure today. What are you currently working on?
Okay, thank you, Dustin. Let me first describe to you briefly the current state of RTD so that you can appreciate our approach to technology as it relates to operation and administration. Right now, we're providing 15% level of service compared to pre-COVID level, which is not too bad. However, our consumption is pretty bad. Our ridership level is at 35% compared to pre-COVID level, and we're collecting only 20 to 25% of fare revenues that we normally receive. So where do we go from here? No ridership, uncertain when they will be back, and uncertain if their travel behaviors and patterns have changed. And while COVID may end, the impacts of COVID to transit will last probably between 3 to 5 years. It's very timely, and we're in the middle of it, to have a system redesign study we branded as Next Gen. And this requires a massive amount of outreach and data collection for the purpose of defining the right kind and the right amount of service the community needs under the current environment within our financial resources. Most of our contractors' outreach activities are done electronically and virtually through social media, website, community forums, and through Zoom meetings like this one. One interesting feature is the ability to gather travel information passively through mobile devices equipped with GPS. That's interesting. This study will also determine the right mix of zero-emission technology that we need to implement. We've started with all-electric technology, but we realize that due to challenges on grid resiliency created by severe weather condition and weather-induced wildfire, that we need to explore alternative technologies such as hydrogen cell, solar technology in our facilities, along with battery electric storage system. We have begun the first phase of our solar project and are also in partnership with PG&E for the installation of our first battery electric storage system. This is important because I've heard this one in the beginning. We've also begun a paradigm shift in technology by adopting cloud-based systems. Transit operation is now being driven by the rapid changes in technology, and all kinds of data are accessible if you have the right technology, and it will not be cost effective to host them all, right? And in addition, our fare collection system also needs improvement. While we have mobile ticketing systems and the traditional paper tickets, our goal is to have a cashless transaction. This means not having cash on the buses or fare vending machines, but open payment or plastic transit passes that you can tap as you board the buses and able to load fares through third-party outlets. This will eliminate the cost of handling cash fares and at the same time allow us to collect all kinds of data. We have other implementations. We have transit asset management system that we have completed. We have completed our digital electronic displays throughout the facilities. A lot of opportunities. However, we're breaking them into manageable pieces that are driven by the magnitude and urgency of need, in addition to balancing it with financial resources. And you understand what that means when it comes to public agency operation.
That's amazing. When do you sleep?
hardly
with all of that going.
4 hours last night.
You've got a lot on your plate. So Brendan,
Yes.
I want to bring you to the conversation now. So you've seen a lot of change on digital infrastructure over the years, and you've got this really interesting way of breaking down the evolution of that and how it relates to your district. And what's the impact that COVID's had on that entire journey?
Yeah, Dustin, it's a great question. And I think the way I like to look at it is really in the recreation industry and the recreation field, right? So if you think about 3 or 5 years ago, what was really becoming popular were wearable technologies. There was Fitbit, people had apps on their phones, and then things began to merge into technologies like Strava, where you can run and you can see your friends on Strava and who's doing what and the times people are making. And people started to bring that technology into their home as well through things like Peloton and other ways to recreate and exercise, and it really became more common. The other thing that was happening at the same time, a little bit under the radar, was esports, so electronic sports. And you think of video games, right? It's not necessarily somebody sitting in their basement playing video games. Esports has exploded over the last couple of years. It's second only to the NFL when it comes to revenue and fans. Let me say that again, revenue and fans. There are a lot of people that watch esports and esporting events. Colleges have esport teams and they offer scholarships now, and college teams compete almost like college football teams compete. And you'll see that the private sector and the Defense Department are taking an interest in that. As a matter of fact, the U.S. Air Force sponsored the recent virtual drone championship that happened a couple of years ago. So it's people competing virtually flying drones and sponsored by the U.S. Air Force. Obviously, the Air Force needs pilots that can fly drones, so it's a natural fit. And also, it's not just sports and recreation. that have moved into digital technology. You can find apps now for bird identification. You can find apps for tree and plant identification. So if you're taking a walk on a trail, you can use your phone or apps to do that. There's also Pokemon Go tournaments that take place in parks. What happened with COVID, though, was really interesting. I think COVID took a lot of these things that we considered trends in the recreation field and just made them normal operations. A lot of our programming had to become virtual because people were at home and things were closed. The ways that we engaged our public had to become virtual. So public meetings needed to move into the virtual sphere through Zoom and other technologies. And I think we also saw parks pivot to become social service providers, almost providing COVID vaccinations or COVID testing. Parks were open when everything else was closed. The recreation centers may have been closed, but the park space itself was open. So people could get out, they could recreate, they could improve their health and mental well-being during the pandemic. So I think it's really interesting that parks have been at the forefront of this, not only trends in technology, but then adoption of technology. And I'll take it all the way back to what Brian said at the beginning of our conversation when he talked about doing lots of pilot programs and projects. I think we were doing those before, and now we are going to be doing those as just normal operating procedure as we go forward in the coming months and years.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, districts can no longer sit on the sidelines. They have to be very proactive. And I think you're all great examples of what can come out of that. So Dan, I know you've seen a lot in this space as well. And I'd love for you to maybe share with the audience a little bit about some of the technological and operational shifts that are impacting the way that special districts are delivering services today.
Well, as you've heard from all of the peers and people around, everybody repeated the same sort of things, right? It's cloud and it's mobility. Those are the things that are driving our entire society is getting to easier access to technology, faster access to technology, and being able to take it with you wherever you go. And I think those are the things that in districts who have embraced those are the ones who have done the best and who have been able to adapt to that very well. Everybody's already made the point about the cloud being the enabler, right? That if it weren't for the cloud, imagine what our life would have been like as we went through COVID, right? And if it wasn't for the technology, the mobility technology that we could take our devices, we could get access to our networks and stuff, how difficult would have this entire process been? It would have been horrendously bad. But I think the one thing is that I'd like to point out is that, in my opinion, to the extent in which special districts and government in general can embrace engaging their consumers, can learn to take advantage of these technologies, and to get more people engaged in government, to get more people engaged in the services that they offer, and to reach out to people that they haven't before. To that extent, it's going to make all of us feel better about whatever we spend on these kinds of services. So I think that's a key thing. And I know we're running slow, so I'll close it up and let you move along.
Yeah, no, those are great insights, Dan. So Gloria, on the funding kind of path, and I know we just talked a little bit about this in our last panel, you were fortunate enough to have received access to 2 of the 3 federal funding bills. And you've said that these funds aren't just being used to bridge the revenue gaps, but to provide a new way to experiment. And I'd love for you to break down how you're using those funds to experiment.
Okay, thank you. Those who are in public transport operation are aware that every funding source or subsidy comes with it a lot of strings attached. So there are still parameters that go along with the stimulus funding that we need to seriously comply with. But this is a very important element. Other than the award of the stimulus funding, there has been a relaxation of performance measurement requirements at the state and federal level. And this gives us a break and an opportunity to be creative and experiment on the various mobility options for our community. So for a start, now we can take a chance in forming partnerships with employers, schools, and other social service agencies with minimal investment on their part, but provide RTD with an opportunity to put more people on the buses and not collect full fares for now. This will allow us to regain the confidence of the public on the safety of public transit, reintroduce our organization, and learn more about changes in our customers' travel behavior, patterns, preferences under the current environment. I'm proud to say that we have started this partnership with San Joaquin Delta College, and we'll work on a few more. Another experiment we actually did was, or implemented was, we opened our VanGo or on-demand transit. This is our micro transit service to go anywhere in the county without worrying about zones. We used to have 4 zones that govern this service. Again, our goal is to collect data on origin and destination and to attract more people to ride the system. Operationally, we have invested a lot of money in upgrading our sanitation practices in terms of the sanitation of the buses to regain the confidence of the public with regard to safety in public transit. But what we're looking into right now is an air filtration system on the buses. And it's supposed to be, this is the extent of my chemistry, hydrogen peroxide molecules that continue to treat the air on the buses. And that would be an additional incentive or additional encouragement to regain, again, the confidence of the public on the safety of public transportation. And that's my chemistry 101. Thank you.
I love that. You're blending, innovation with digital infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and biological infrastructure. Yeah. So you've got everything going on. So Brendan, you mentioned in our prior conversations that, the shift from traditional services has provided an opportunity to offer more social services. So I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit more about the role your digital infrastructure has played in that pivot and what you're doing to increase social service access for people.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, social services is not really what we're in the business of, right? Parks are in the business of recreation and land management and conservation. And so over the last several years, we've seen more social services being offered at parks, such as the summer food program that many parks offer and other things. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One is because parks are trusted by people in their community. They are, as Jonathan mentioned, super hyper local. Everybody, knows their local park. They love their local park and they know the staff at their local park. And so it's a great opportunity for social service delivery, for government to provide those sorts of social services. And also we've talked a lot about partnering for us as a park agency to partner with some of our colleagues in the social service sector who offer those programs. We don't necessarily provide the COVID testing, let's say, but our partners in other city departments do, so they can come in and partner with us on that. I think though where technology really has started to come in more for us, obviously I'll echo what everyone has said, but it's the opportunity for us to be more nimble, as Carlita said, right? It's difficult to find nimbleness in government, but being able to provide those technological links internal to our organization to be able to coordinate with my colleagues who may be in a different part of the city, who are working on different projects, that just allows our reach to be that much better and that much farther when we're trying to connect with our communities. We've talked a lot about data as well. So getting that data and understanding what our communities need and how we can assist in moving those resources around in the social service sector. Certainly, we have seen the importance of mental health over the last year. I think in the park and recreation sector, we've been working on that for many years, but it's really risen to the top with the pandemic and the importance of providing a mental health outlet for our communities and those resources. Because we're all dealing with a lot, right? We're not dealing with as much as Gloria is, but we're all dealing with a lot. And so any opportunity we can to be that partnership, to be that location where social services can come and provide it to the community, I just see that as being a trend continuing forward. And then if we then can offer recreation services to those folks who might be coming for a social service, that's just a bigger benefit for our customers overall.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. You're designing experiences for them and you're meeting them where they're at and, going above and beyond. So, hats off to you and the team for that. So Dan, as you look to the national landscape of special districts that are, looking to prepare for the uncertainties ahead and really trying to kind of, wrap their arms around what this new normal, next normal, fill in the blank, term is, who's doing it right outside of everyone that we've heard today? And what are they doing to be more adaptable?
Well, first, I would say anybody who's survived and thrived in this last year is doing it right. It's been a very big, challenging year for all of us. And it's exciting to see everybody so excited about the future and their opportunities. And so that tells a lot about the leadership that they're showing and sharing with their friends. Like I said before, we're fortunate that COVID happened right now, that we were in a time and a place in which the technology was readily available. It was maybe not embraced as much as it could have been before COVID, but it was definitely embraced in COVID. I'll give you an example of a great idea that I'm going through right now with a state who issued an RFI. And their RFI was, you guys tell us in industry what we should be looking for. What should we be evaluating? What should we be considering? Where should we look, taking into consideration as we go out and consider doing an RFP for obtaining services? And I think that is a great approach that all governments should look to embrace where they can. Take advantage of the knowledge of not just the industry, but any interested party to contribute to help you find the right solutions.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and something, we've seen a few times of unsolicited proposal opportunities that have, come from the federal level down to this level. So I think that's great advice for special districts to, kind of almost replace the RFI with a way to kind of get some initial ideas and innovative approaches to what they're looking at doing. And speaking of innovative approaches, back to you, Gloria, on looking at the future of cloud-based and contactless systems. We know contactless is something that many agencies are focusing on. And if that's a new phrase for those of you listening in, it's basically removing the physical contact requirements associated with having a service delivered. And so using your phone to touch to pay, or as a bus ticket, or other things are all a part of this. So would love to learn how you're approaching that, Gloria.
First, I would like to talk about the cloud-based system, right? As I mentioned earlier, transit operation is now being driven by technology. For us to continue to be relevant, especially this pandemic that put transit in an existential crisis, we need to have quality and timely information for us to be able to provide the right kind of service where there is demand. We cannot possibly host all the needed software applications because number one, we cannot afford it, right? And number two, we can't keep up with the competency requirement in administering these applications. Now, with regard to data collection and management, we need to do things creatively and efficiently for the convenience of our passengers, and that contactless systems seems to be one that will provide that, in addition to being able to collect all kinds of travel data. So that's really a treat, right? That we're able to get all kinds of data that before we had to do a lot of things manually, reconciliations, and now they come in an automated fashion and make it convenient for the passengers also. We're implementing that with the San Joaquin Delta College, and we're trying to build upon one platform that has already established by our Council of Governments. And instead of having to start from zero, we're going to build upon that and move on and move up.
And so, Brendan, when you look at all of these changes that are happening, what role does this digital world mean for your future prospective employees? We know the silver tsunami and, workplace recruitment and retention issues have, been a real challenge for special districts. What are you trying to put in place to deal with some of these challenges and some of the new expectations that your prospective employees have for you?
Yeah, well, I think it's no secret that young people have technology embedded in their lives. It's been a part of their life from birth. Young people are our current and future customers. They also are our future taxpayers and elected officials. So I think it's important that we acknowledge the role that technology does now and will play in the future. So it really starts with onboarding and training, the ability to help people remotely do training, or all of the various onboarding things that need to happen when you join an organization. But I also think listening to young people and trying to incorporate their ideas and technology into our work is also important. They have great ideas now, and for our delivery of services, for how we bring recreation forward in the coming years, they'll have ideas that we haven't even thought of or haven't even been created yet. If there's a TikTok yoga dance that we can do to get more customers into our parks, great. I have a colleague who works out west. He manages a park system out there, and we often have a debate about kids on their phones in a park. He hates it. He thinks that it means that they're not recreating. I love it because those kids are in a park. And even if they're, checking their Twitter feed or whatever they're doing, they're still in a park. And that to me is a win. And if we can capture them when they're there, either through push technology or messaging or whatever it is, then we're able to get them into our regular programming and perhaps have them influence and change our regular programming in a way that means they'll bring their friends next time they come to the park.
Yeah, that's a fantastic approach. I love that, Brendan. So Dan, two quick questions for you. One is, can you share the state that did that RFI? And we can always include a link in our follow-up emails as well. So that's first question.
Sure. That's Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. All right.
Yep.
So great. We'll grab that RFI and share it with the group. And then the second question for you is around, what's the opportunity kind of hiding in plain sight for special district leaders today? What should they be thinking of as they look to modernize and prepare their districts for the future?
Well, I think the one thing that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about is the Internet of Things and massive mobility and in the ability to control and monitor and learn from and take advantage. I haven't heard a lot about it, but I'm having conversations with cities all over the country trying to control their traffic signals, states and governments trying to control their highways and all of their signaling and control the speed limits, those kinds of things. There's a huge opportunity to be able to automate and dynamically control the public infrastructure that's out there. And to the extent, I think IoT is the big area that people should be looking at and considering. How do I embrace it?
Yeah, that's great. And we're now at this point where there's more devices connected on Earth than people. So definitely IoT is here and we need to figure out how to leverage that. And Gloria, I know this is something you're looking at too, because you're in the process of conducting a next gen study to help you really prioritize what's next. Would love for you to share with other district leaders that are listening in what you're doing with the study and then how you're planning on leveraging the findings from it.
Yes, this study is for us to find out what we don't already know. Okay, since COVID has changed our way of life, work from home, online education, delivery of food or grocery to our home, video streaming, those are our customers. Those are ridership, right? So how do we as public transit continue to be relevant? We don't know if these are the new normal, and given the current environment and beyond, what type and kind of mobility options will the community need? That's what we want. We want a scalable and flexible plan that will respond to the community's needs. It may introduce a new service type that is totally different from the traditional approach we have right now. We need to be careful and strategic in evaluating and implementing the recommendation. Now, we are fortunate to be in a transit industry that's a highly collaborative industry. We are all faced with the same problems, but our approach to solving them is different because our community is unique. Each community is unique. Nevertheless, we share information so that we know what our options are and we can learn from another community's lessons and experience. Sharing is a great asset of the industry, and we will make sure to capitalize on that as we figure out a way to implement our recovery plan.
Fantastic. And we'll absolutely share the results of that with the wider special district community as well. So Brendan, looking to the future, what's on your radar for the future of your digital infrastructure that other leaders should take note of?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things in the recreation field that are interesting to me. Certainly, we will continue virtual competitions. That's here to stay. But what I think will be different is virtual team competitions. So currently, you can run a virtual 5K right now, post your time and see your friends' time and that sort of thing. I've started to see team-based competitions creeping into the virtual world, particularly in marathons and other types of longer run competitions and that sort of thing. So I'll keep an eye on that. The other thing that I think will happen is virtual fans and virtual stands. So the ability to watch your kid's soccer game as you sit in your minivan in the parking lot, maybe there's a camera put up somewhere and you can pull it up on your phone, or your grandparents can watch their grandkid competing in lacrosse or whatever it may be. I think that will happen even if we're able, even as we come back to actual fans physically in stands. I think the ability to connect virtually will be interesting. And then the final thing that we have to keep an eye on is using technology to better serve our customers. Patrick talked about how does AI work on our side. I think somewhere in there's a unique ability, particularly in the recreation world, to really provide what our customers need. If I go on to Instagram right now and there's a chocolate chip cookie ad that pops up, I get a little freaked out because I love chocolate chip cookies. But if there's a way, if I sign up for a lap swim class at my local park, is there a way that I get a notification that, they also offer an ab and core training class or something like that? So knowing what our customers want in the recreation field, knowing what we offer and how we can connect those folks, I think will be important, as well as how do we respond to sort of what Gloria said, how do we respond to changing customer needs? So if, let's say tennis is not as interesting in one community as baseball, maybe there's a way to shift resources and provide that in a more reactive way than has been done in the past.
Fantastic. And Dan, final word from you. What trends are on your radar that will have the most profound impact on the digital infrastructure of special districts going forward?
I think, one of the things we have not talked about at all is edge computing and multi-access edge computing and near edge computing. We've talked about the migration to cloud and how we're putting servers in the cloud. Well, that is a great model in general across the board, but there are things that are very time sensitive, latency sensitive, that need quick responses and quick reaction times. And edge computing is all about being able to take a tiny chunk of the cloud, what needs to be, and moving it closer to the end user, moving it closer to the industry. And I think you'll see the cloud adapting through the next 3 to 5 years to be able to offer those kinds of services and optimize the performance delivery for cloud services.
Fantastic. Well, Brendan, Gloria, and Dan, thanks so much for carving some time out to share all your amazing insights and innovations with the rest of the group. All right. Well, I do want to be respectful of our time commitment, so we'll have to begin our wrap up here. I wish I had 2 more hours with this group because they've been so fantastic and amazing as a part of all of this. We've learned a ton, including that Gloria doesn't sleep. And so we'll have to, get her insights next time as a part of this. But I hope this has been an inspiration for each of you that have taken some time out to join us today. And then a few closing thoughts that I wanted to put out there for the group. First of all, make sure you're plugged into the Special Districts program at govtech.com/districts. The link's on your screen. You can sign up for our newsletter, browse resources and editorial to help you prepare your district for the future. Also, make sure you check out our National Awards program and you can browse past winners. But we'd love for you to submit your own nominations to tell us about what you're doing and all the great things that are happening. Make sure you also, while you're there, download a copy of the 2021 annual publication that surfaces the latest research, best practices, and innovations coming out of 2020, but how you can apply them this year to maximize value and really take advantage of innovation. And lastly, make sure you save the dates for our major special district virtual events that will be happening for this year. If you'd like to pre-register for those events, to save your seat, simply click the yes on the poll question and we'll make sure you're on the list. We've got 2 big events remaining. We're doing a fall summit, partly based on the output of the conversation today that will be September 16th. And then our 2021 Special Districts Year in Review and Recognition Summit to showcase ideas, best practices, and leadership as districts prepare their infrastructure and operations for the future. So we'd love to have you there. And in closing, I just want to thank everyone for joining us for today's event and for spending the last 2 hours with us. A big thank you goes to our amazing group of panelists that shared, starting with our keynote with Brian through all of these topics that we've unpacked today. And then a special thank you to our partners at AT&T for helping enable us to have this discussion with you all today. And thanks to you all for joining us, for engaging in discussion. We look forward to seeing you again soon at another government technology event. And on behalf of myself, Government Technology Magazine, Marlene Juba, and the entire AT&T team, we hope you have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you again soon. We'll see you next time.